And welcome to election night, with results already being counted across the country. Council elections in England and Wales, millions of people entitled to vote, over 4,000 councillors being elected, and tomorrow the mayor and assembly elections for London. The impact of all this could hardly be greater on the Prime Minister. For a start, it's the first election he's faced as Prime Minister, the first test of how he's doing. For the Tories, a measure of how well Cameron's doing, whether they're making that kind of momentum that will take them through to a general election victory. For the Liberal Democrats, a chance to see whether their faith in Nick Clegg is justified. Now, in local elections, fantastically complex is all I can say. So we need all the expertise we've got. And luckily tonight we have Tweedledum and Tweedledee here, BBC's political editor Nick Robinson, and Professor Anthony King of Essex University. We've got leading figures from the political parties joining us. At the moment we have Tessa Giles, George Osborne and Charles Kennedy with us, and there'll be others following from them later on. And the cruel truths will be brought to us by Jeremy Vine.
Well, it was cruel, wasn't it, David, when Vince Cable, the Lib Dem, said Mr Brown had gone from Stalin to Mr Bean. Here we are in the Brown Portrait Gallery, looking at the picture of him when he started as leader, commander of all he surveyed, and then seeing gradually him getting more and more tired there as the snap election was cancelled, and then gradually the lost data discs and Northern Rock, and we'll ask whether by the end of tonight he ends up as Mr Bean. And of course a big part of that will be the London mayoral contest. We will try and bring some of these cartoon characters to life for you to see what happens there. And, well, we don't even need to name them, do we? We know who they are. Red Ken and Lord Snooty Boris Johnson and PC Paddock. We'll see how they fare against each other too. Back to you.
We'll be back with Jeremy from time to time, well, frequently really, to interpret all this. And the sort of excitement about these elections really, the truth be told, focused on the Ken Livingstone-Boris Johnson battle, almost like Obama and Clinton at it all the time on television and their debates and all the rest of it. It sort of outshone all the local elections put together. And Emily Maitlis is going to be with, among other people, the bruised and battered campaigners down at London City Hall tonight.
Yes, tonight from the heart of London, we promise to bring you an evening of intrigue and gossip, perhaps the odd political fact. Here at City Hall, the home of London government, are three
inner London as well, the Ken-loving part of London in general. Now, this suggests that there's been real motivation on both parties' part, and therefore makes the result incredibly difficult to call, though some Tories, perhaps unwisely, have already called it for their man Boris Johnson.
OK, I love the caveats you put into all this. Tony King, what are you going to be looking at tonight especially?
Well, I'm going to be
looking
looking
into these results,
especially at life outside London. I think some people need a reminder that there is life outside London. Of all the people who live in the UK, 3/4 of them live in England or Wales outside London. And they're going to be very interested in tonight's results. What are we going to be looking for? Quite simply, whether Labour is going to be as badly hit as everybody thinks it's going to be, including people on the Labour side. And as you said a moment ago, whether the Conservatives have got the kind of momentum that they need to have now if they're to win in what is probably going to be a couple of years' time.
OK, and we have to remember, of course, we're comparing this with a very bad year for Labour, which was 2004, and a very good year for the Tories. Jeremy, just give us the general picture of how things, what we're going to be examining.
David, let's take a look at the map, because that's a great place to start, and just see the layout. As you say, England and Wales is where these elections are being held, and this is the terrain, the raised grey bits apart, so where these councils are actually being elected, 159 of them in total, including all 22 of the councils in Wales here. But you notice a lot of space, the light blue on the map. If that's you watching at home, you're thinking, why didn't I have a vote today? It may well be, you know, if you're down to the southwest, for example, there wasn't a lot of electing going on down there, just Exeter and Plymouth. So quite a lot of space on the map, places where there wasn't anyone voting. This is the map as it was constituted going into this election. The blue, obviously Conservative, red Labour, yellow is Lib Dem, white is hung councils, and that's Plaid Cymru there in Wales in green. And we'll be taking a look at some of the individual councils as we go on through the night. But I think, if I can, it just might be worth having a look at the polls and the way that they told the story of Mr Brown's premiership since he took over. Let's just take a look back, if we can, to what the polls were doing in May last year, when Mr Blair was in his final moments as Prime Minister. And I'll bring it up here, and you'll see that we have a situation here where the Conservatives are ahead, but not by much. 36 plays 33. And then that Brown bounce that everyone talked about at the time seems slightly like a distant memory now, but 39% to Labour as Brown took over. And then things started, as we mentioned, to go wrong. And you can see the polls gradually turning against Mr Brown. And you watch this sequence here of the Conservatives starting to lock in quite a handy lead from their point of view. And basically, that stays in place. We end up with 40, 30 and 18 to the Lib Dems. And the big question tonight, whether the real votes, it's such a relief to have real votes to count here, the real votes actually underline what the polls have been telling us since Mr Brown's premiership began to go, in the words of his critics, slightly awry. Back to our map then, just to look at some specific areas that we'll be focusing on. Of course, I know you'll be saying this in the studio, local elections, local stories. Not all voting happens on a national basis, and there are particularities in councils that we'll be looking at which make them interesting, but also we'll have national resonance as well. We've chosen 11 to bring out to you. We've chosen, for example, here, Caerphilly, which is Labour, but a very small swing to Plaid Cymru, the Welsh nationalists. About 2% would take that council away from Labour. If you're interested in how the Lib Dems and the Conservatives are doing, you mentioned Nick Clegg, David, but the Clegg-Cameron tussle will be highlighted in Cheltenham, because that's hung at the moment. They're absolutely level. 6% would give it, a 6% swing to the Conservatives would give them the council. What else? Reading. Labour since 1986, and a very rare dot of red there in southeast England. 4% swing would take that council away from Labour. And also down here in the southeast is Thurrock. Interestingly, Thurrock had been Labour, had been Conservative, and then rather against the trend, the Conservatives lost it last year. They need a tiny swing to get Thurrock back. So we'll watch that. And then right up here in the northeast, Conservatives would love to get North Tyneside, because they're always being told they don't have enough councillors in certain areas. This is outside their comfort zone. They need 2% swing for that council, although it does still have a Labour mayor. So that's the map. We'll come back to it again and again, I know. David.
Great. Now, Tessa Jowell, do you have a sense of foreboding, as many commentators say you probably do, as you go into this evening and these results?
I don't have a sense of foreboding, no. I think it's important that we wait and see what the results actually are. And, you know, having
that wouldn't stop you having a sense of foreboding.
No, but
with respect.
I think that, you know, all the indications are that this is likely to be tough. But I think that one of the things, you know, if you've fought, I mean, I fought an enormous number of election campaigns, as many of my colleagues are, and you find that when you have the benefit of actually going out and talking to people, being out there on the streets, knocking on people's doors and so forth, you know, you get a much more measured view of the world than sitting in a studio like this, or you know, within half a mile of this studio
Not
in
sure
the
what
Westminster
that means.
Village.
You mean Labour's
what
doing
I mean
better
is
out there than the commentators say they are?
I don't think it's as bad for us as many of the commentators suggest. Having said that, you know, I'm not predicting that tonight is going to be easy for us. I mean, most of my time over the last 2 months has been spent in London, helping to organise Ken Livingstone's campaign.
Yeah, 2004 was so bad for you, though. It can't get worse than that, can it?
Well, let's see by the end of tonight.
Ah, so you're not optimistic of
I'm
gains?
just simply at the beginning of the evening, with one council declared, I have an open mind, and I don't think any of us can preempt the results.
You got 40%, George Osborne, as the Tories on the national share in the last election last year. People say you've got to do better than that to show that you've got momentum. Do you expect to do better than that tonight?
Well, 40% would be good, and we'll wait and see what happens. I mean, actually, when these councils were fought 4 years ago, we only got 37%. So obviously, we want to make an advance on that. And this is, as Conservatives, we want to demonstrate that we can govern locally, that the change we can bring to local councils is also going to be a change we can bring nationally. And so I'm also going to be looking at councils like Birmingham, where, for example, the Conservatives have run a very successful administration, led a very successful administration, and got one of the lowest council taxes, but also improved the quality of the council. Or Kirklees up in West Yorkshire, which won Council of the Year, now a Conservative council. So it's, these are important locally, but obviously nationally we want to do well. And of course, this is a huge test for Gordon Brown. This is not mid-term in the classic sense.
Are you saying it's more of a test for Gordon Brown than it is for David Cameron?
Well, I think we have to demonstrate. We want to demonstrate steady progress and momentum, as you put it. But these are also the first elections that Gordon Brown has fought as Prime Minister, so they're not mid-term in the classic sense. Labour has, done their big gamble of the Parliament. They've changed their leader without even having a leadership election, certainly without having a general election, and we will see how he does. But we are aware that we are fighting off a very high base.
Charles Kennedy, you did better than any other Liberal Democrat leader, didn't you, in local elections?
Did I?
Yeah, didn't you? It's very
I'm not here to blow my own trumpet.
Happens to be true. You got 29%, the highest popular vote ever in local elections. Do you think Clegg will do as well as that tonight?
It is not impossible, because Labour, I think, are in very great difficulty. I mean, we did, in these equivalent elections last time around, Labour dropped to third place in share of the popular vote. I don't think that had ever happened before. When George, if I just add to his account there, big cities that were running like Newcastle, Liverpool and so on, and Birmingham, and great advances being made in Birmingham, not just, I'm sure you'll acknowledge, due to the Conservatives.
In partnership with the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you very much, yes. So,
I did say,
the question was whether Clegg will do. The question was whether Clegg will do as well as you did.
I think that we can be in for a solid performance tonight. You have to remember, 4 years ago, when I was leader of these equivalent elections, it was the height of the Iraq controversy, the absence of weapons of mass destruction, which cast a massive shadow, maybe to a slightly unhealthy effect, over localised elections, although we were significant beneficiaries. I think the other thing is, I mean, there will be inevitably be a lot of talk about the leaders. Nick has only been in the job a matter of weeks. David Cameron will be measured in terms of how the Conservatives do. Obviously, Gordon Brown is being roasted on the spit by many commentators and by some of his own people at the moment, and if it's a bad night, that will add to that sense. I don't think it's quite such a barometer in terms of our own leadership, to be honest. I don't think you can read across to quite that extent.
We'll come back. You have lots more time to talk, but we'll go around the country a bit. Let's join Michael Crick, who's in Bury. Now, Bury in Greater Manchester, which is one of the places that the Tories are hoping to take from no overall control. Important sign, if they do, that they're making headway in the north. You have any idea how it's gone, Michael?
Well, no, not yet. Things are rather slow here. Bury, of course, is the home of the famous Bury Black Pudding, and I've taken the opportunity to stock up, and it was the birthplace of Sir Robert Peel. And now it's really the big target for the Tories in the northwest, which they sort of, in a way, hope, if they're successful tonight, it'll act as a bridgehead for further gains at the parliamentary level in the next election in the northwest. Now, you talk to Labour people here tonight, they're saying, look, it's not going to be a great night for Labour. On the other hand, it's not meltdown either, although other sources in the Labour camp are saying they may be in trouble in one of their safe wards, not just the wards that have been targeted by the Conservatives. I spoke to voters at polling stations this afternoon and this evening, trying to find out why they were voting the way they were, why some of them weren't voting Labour anymore. There was a lot of mention of the 10p tax rate, as you might expect, Gordon Brown's performance, and I think for the first time in an election, perhaps in 6 years now, nobody to me mentioned the war. So it looks like the war is finally fading as an election issue, but there was a whole range of other grumbles. But I wasn't entirely convinced that the grumbling, the defection, was going to the Conservative Party. There weren't that many new Conservatives to me. They were going to, some of them are going to the BNP, some of them, of course, will have abstained, some to the Lib Dems.
OK, thanks very much, Michael. We'll be back with you later on. The whole of Wales, or every voter in Wales who was registered and wanted to vote, was able to vote today. And Betsan Powys is down there in Wales. Betsan, what are you looking out for tonight?
Well, certainly yes, there is life outside London, as I heard somebody mention earlier. And there certainly would be quite a lot of life here in the Vale of Glamorgan if a whole load of postal votes hadn't been handed in at the polling stations fairly late in the day today. So things starting fairly slowly. But there are plenty of questions here in Wales as well. One fairly obvious one for Welsh Labour, and I don't incidentally think they know the answer yet, which is quite simply, if there is a big anti-Labour swing, does Rhodri Morgan's Labour feel the full force of it, or might they just weather the storm? They only hold 7 of the 22 councils here outright as it is. If you start hearing about Flintshire, Newport, Blaenau Gwent, Caerphilly, those sorts of places falling to no overall control, then they're not having a good night of it. The Lib Dems here, well, they did well 4 years ago. They'll do well, therefore, to hang on to what they've got. Now then, the Conservatives, the Tory story, well, it is happening here in Barry, in the Vale of Glamorgan. The kind of straightforward Conservative Labour pitch battle, the kind of council they should be taking with ease at this sort of time. Now, they're quietly confident, but you do get the feeling that if Labour go down, it'll be with a fight. Now, that leaves the fourth big party here in Wales, Plaid Cymru, in national government now, of course, in coalition with Labour. Now, how has that been playing on the doorsteps? Might they pay a price for that? Now, there are stories coming from Gwynedd, the council that they do hold outright now, their heartland really, that there might be a few scalps being taken in Gwynedd. Plaid Cymru will cheer themselves if they do well and pick up some ground elsewhere and prove that they deserve that relatively new name of theirs, Plaid, the Party of Wales.
Betsan, thank you very much indeed. We're getting the first news from we look at key wards across the country and measure how people are voting between the three parties, as well as giving the results council by council. And we've got a number of those in, and the message so far is it's looking good for the Tories tonight, looking bad for the Liberal Democrats, and Labour at best the same as it was in 2004, so not much change, 2004 and 2007. Tony.
The Berry result that Michael Crick was talking about is really very significant indeed. The best polls for the Tories at the moment are showing a swing to the Tories since the last general election, approaching 10%. To take Berry, they need a swing only of about 5 or 6%. If they don't do that, one will really begin to wonder whether the polls are being accurate, since this is a pretty typical sort of place that the Tories have to win. If they do take it, that'll be a very good sign, not only for tonight, but probably for the next few months, possibly the next couple of years.
Those signs from the boffins behind the scenes about the early wards in, David, are interesting because it confirms what we all know, which is it's going to be a poor night for Labour. The question was, how poor? Now, if it's around about what it was a year ago, around about what it was 4 years ago, they will say, well, look, we went on and won a general election with Tony Blair in 2005 after a poor local election performance. Their critics, of course, their enemies will say, hold on, you've changed leader, you talked of renewing, you should be doing a much better than that. Nick Clegg will have, if this turns out to be right, a slightly harder story to tell, which is it will look as though he's going backwards, and I suspect they will look for any individual council they can point to that demonstrates some sort of progress. So the measure of how you judge success is going to be terribly important. Are you judging against last year when Tony Blair was unpopular, 4 years ago when he was massively unpopular because of the Iraq War, or against some sort of baseline expectation of what Gordon Brown as a new leader ought to be doing?
OK. Let's go down to City Hall and join Emily Maitlis.
Hi, David. Yes, today being election day is normally a politics-free zone, but not in the world of blogging. All afternoon, those political animals have been at it like, well, bloggers. And I'm going to bring you some of their Twitter, their chatter, their marginals, their finds, all the little eccentricities of the blogging world in just a second. But first, let me introduce them. In the blue corner, Ian Dale is the publisher of the monthly magazine Total Politics, and he is one best-known political bloggers. Describing herself as a liberal civilian with a social conscience, Alex Mortimer's blog slogan is tea, idleness, liberalism and wine, a welcome addition to the online Lib Dem community. Luke Akehurst has been a Labour councillor in Hackney, East London, since 2002 and says his ambition is to be Chief Whip in an 8th-term Labour government. Luke, before we get to that 8th-term Labour government, just tell us about your experiences today. You had a mayoral candidate inside your very home.
Yeah, I had Ken Livingstone round at my house with Diane Abbott and our local London Assembly member.
What was he doing there, Luke? You have to tell us.
Well, what he was doing in practice was going for a quick toilet break before he went out to go door to door in all the shops and cafes along Stoke Newington High Street.
I hope you have one of those little blue plaques on your roof now.
Maybe.
And your activism is very much getting the mayoral.
Yeah, I've had a busy day running a campaign headquarters for Hackney North, which is a kind of core Labour area, and we think we did pretty well in getting our vote out there in an area that historically would be a rather low turnout area.
OK, Luke, thanks very much. I'm going to rudely miss out Alex for a second. Ian, I want your 3 best facts of the night.
Well, the most interesting one so far is from the Conservative Home blog, who've called the London mayoral election for Boris Johnson. Now, they've really got their finger on the pulse of the Conservative Party. They've had Conservative activists contact them all day. And there's a particularly high turnout in the outer boroughs around London, which are all Tory areas, which didn't turn out for Steve Norris in 2004. Phil Hendren on the Dizzy Thinks blog, he reckons there's a 70% turnout in London, which is unheard of in these sort of elections.
So what kind of things are we hearing about? Seats, councils, anything there?
Well,
less sexy perhaps, but still relevant to their big night.
My first result tonight was from Swansea with the Conservative gain. There's another one in Chorley in the north. Obviously the Conservatives want to do well in the north tonight, so any gains in the north of England, they're going to pour over. But the national vote share is what everybody's looking at. Labour are saying that the Conservatives need to get 47%, which of course is a joke, they're just spinning that. We're looking at, I think, 41, 42%.
OK, Alex, some interesting stuff's come to light on Boris.
Yes, I've been wondering about this. I wrote about this morning on my blog. Apparently there's a story in the Times this morning. Boris is apparently going to stay on as MP for Henley if he becomes Mayor of London. Now, Ian, my top source here, has just told me that's rubbish. So I'm kind of interested in where that story's come from and what he thinks he's doing, if there's any truth in it. Because if you're Mayor of London...
It's a bit odd if you're sitting around.
It's a little bit odd, yeah.
All right, thanks very much. I should tell you, behind their cool exteriors, there are beating hearts of passion, and they are promising they are going to get the results before you do, David. Let me just bring you our web pages here. This is Ian Dale's diary. Luke's blog we can go to as well. I'm going to pull us back to this one. A rather attractive picture of me, I think you'll all agree. And we'd very much like you to get in touch with us, bbc.co.uk/election, to give us your thoughts, your Twitter, my new word. And before we go, I'll just tell you that our next guest, come back to us quickly, is one dead ringer, John Culshaw, who will be talking to us over here at the bar with Clemency Burton Hill. And there's your man, there's your man. We'll be talking to him in just a few moments when he will be taking us through all the politicians he musters.
Ian Dale says that the Liberal Democrats have taken control of Hull on his blog, and Liverpool is a key place where the Liberal Democrats have been in a bit of trouble because the Audit Commission said they were doing very badly on the financial front, and they're desperate to hold on to Liverpool, one of their key cities. David Woodthorpe is there. Do you have any indication, David, what's happening up there?
Well, if you talk to Joe Anderson, who's the leader of the Labour group here, he's still bullishly saying that they will take Liverpool into no overall control. And that means picking up about 6 seats based on the way people were originally elected. There have been some defectors in the last year. If you talk to Lib Dem activists as they've been coming in, they've been saying, look, we think there's going to be a very low turnout. We think Labour vote isn't getting out at all. We don't think there is the anger on the streets. And they actually rather jokingly refer to Gordon Brown being the best canvasser for the Lib Dems. So they're backing Gordon because they claim he's getting Lib Dem votes coming their way.
Well, thanks very much. We'll be back up there. Let's have a look, though, with Jeremy at these first key wards that have come in, Jeremy, and the change that they're showing. And then perhaps our 3 politicians would like to comment on what we've gleaned so far. Small crumbs, but a bit anyway. Jeremy.
tiny crumbs really from us, because our key wards, roughly 950, nearly 1,000 wards, and we're looking at them as they come in order to give us some idea of how this local election would play across the country if it had been held in that way with everyone voting. So let's just see what's happened so far. How many of our key wards? Well, only 10% so far, but that is 208,000 people's votes have been counted, and I'm going to show you now the change on last time these seats were contested, mainly 2004, of course. Let's have a look. So we start with Labour here, and they're down 3% just on these early counts, 3% down. Conservatives are up 6%. I want to hear George Osborne's reaction to that. Don't know if that'll be sustained through the night, but let's see. Lib Dems are down 4%, and then let's have a look just at others, not really shifting very much. So far, early days, that's what we got.
Oh, thanks very much, Jeremy. Well, Charles Kennedy, it's not looking too hot, is it, for Liberal Democrats on those figures?
Well, I think that the thing here is, I mean, first of all, you take this Hull result. I know this isn't absolutely confirmed, but with a local defection there last year, if we retook one ward, we're back in overall control of Hull. Now, if it's the case we've taken 5, and that will be at Labour's expense, that is quite significant. I think also in Liverpool, I'm just looking at the figures here, it's 47 Lib Dem wards at the moment, 35 Labour. You've also got a couple of vacancies. You've got 4 Liberals and some others, 1 independent and so on. I would think, and it's early to say yet, but judging by what our people there are saying, we will still, I think, certainly be probably the largest party in Liverpool, and therefore in effective control of Liverpool by all said and done. So, you know, in what are more testing elections in some of these places for us, so far, so good.
Well, of course, 2004 was a good year for you.
Yeah.
It was a bad year for Labour, Tessa Giles. So for Labour to be showing signs of it being even worse must be pretty dismal.
Well, let's see if that's borne out through the night. And let's also bear in mind, and I suspect that people watching at home will say this as well, that you can't just assume that individual local results are driven solely by national trends and national issues. You know, we've all come here with our particular briefings on particular councils, and you know, it isn't clear cut. I mean, I'm not for one moment denying the extent to which, you know, some people will be registering a protest against the government, or actually some people may be standing up for the government in a difficult time through the way they voted in the local elections. But these are local elections, and there's a limit to how far you can generalise from the local election to a likely general election result. And I think, and Tony will correct me if I'm wrong, I think actually in order to find a relationship between what people said at local elections, you've got to go back to 1995 when we were on 47% of the vote. We then went on 2 years later to win the general election. In 2004, yes, we had a very bad year, but we went on the next year to win the general election. So what I think it's important to do is just to separate out the relationship between how people express their views and vote in local elections and the difference between that and a general election.
There must be,
and this is not a general election.
No, nobody's pretending it's a general election, but it is a kind of indication with real voting about the feeling in the country. And you're one of the people who've been warning that Labour will lose the election if it goes on opposing itself, if people go on complaining. You talked about them, if we fight like ferrets in a sack, I think was your rather vivid description,
yes,
which is presumably what you think is happening at the moment, or you wouldn't have used the word.
And this is not a new political lesson. That divided parties.
You think it is a divided party?
I don't think we are a divided party, and I think that
Why
very
do you
often.
say it then?
Well, because I think that the important thing is that we have a very clear idea of what the country wants of us, and that in government we work to meet the country's expectations of us.
And all this sniping at Brown and the fuss over the 10p rate, the revolt that didn't quite happen over that, the remarks by Mandelson, Charles Clarke, Lord Levy, Lord Desai, all of that. That doesn't mean the party's in any way in trouble. I mean, nobody's doing that in the Tory party.
Well, I think if you take the government and you take the people who are central to making government work and making the government work for the people of this country. Because after all, I mean, that's the most, that's the whole, purpose of our existence. I think that there is extraordinary unity in the government and a sense of common purpose. Okay. And I think that a willingness to debate is different from division, and there are not divisions in the Labour Party such as those that characterised the Tory party throughout the late 80s and into the 90s.
Maybe that's just because you don't have anybody ready to take over the leadership from Gordon Brown and challenge for it.
No, that is absolutely not right. I mean, there is broad consensus in the Labour Party that New Labour, that being able to attract support from a very wide range of people in different parts of the country, occupying the centre ground. That is the consensus that British people want.
And I said some people will be crowing and some people were defending their position. Are you crowing over a 6-point improvement on 2004 for the Tories, George Osborne?
Well, I mean, obviously, if that was borne out through the night, that'd be very good for us. I'm also hearing we're actually gaining council seats in places like Sunderland in the northeast, gaining in places like Halton near my constituency in the northwest of England, as well as gaining seats in Witney, which might be expected due to the local MP being David Cameron. But we are gaining, and that's what I like about this, is that there are actually Conservative councillors being elected and Conservative councils able to deliver Conservative policies on the ground.
Want to have a look at Worcester, which you hope to take, a hung council? Stays the same, Conservative 17. Labour on 13, no change. Liberal Democrats on 3. Slight disappointment.
Well, I mean, there are plenty of...
Yes, intrude.
Intrude.
That's
an astonishing result, yes. I must say. That was one that I thought was absolutely certain to go to the Conservatives.
Why?
Because they were only 1 seat short. They controlled it until recently. They lost it in a by-election, amazingly, last autumn. And I thought this was simply going to be a walkover for the Tories. I was very startled.
And what's more, I think in a sense it helps us work through what Tessa Jowell was saying. She's clearly right that these are not national elections. Why they matter nationally is not just because we can project a national vote share, but we can look at individual areas and say, is this the building block to national parliamentary success? Now, in that case, it clearly isn't. The Tories should be winning a council like that in order to win that seat, in order to notch up at least 1 on that massive mountain that they have to go up in order to get it.
On that point, hold on, let's look at this one too, Tunbridge Wells. Now, Tunbridge Wells is a Tory Liberal Democrat battleground. The Conservatives have got a huge majority on the council, but the Liberal Democrats overall lose 3 and the Tories gain 3. So is that a bit disturbing for the Liberal Democrats?
Well, yes and no, because in a way they're never going to win the seat. So the key thing is winning where it matters, not amassing seats or indeed votes where it doesn't matter.
But Tunbridge Wells, does it not matter how the Liberal Democrats do against the Tories in southern England? Because that's what Tunbridge Wells is.
Well, I think there's a fair point, because I think it's the perception of the individual seat. I mean, the figures that you're looking at, the backdrop to this is, an overwhelming Conservative majority. What will be more significant is if you look at perhaps Somerset, what might happen in the council there over the course of the next day, where it's quite finely balanced.
We haven't got much in the West Country at all, have we, in these elections, in fact?
Not much, but I mean, so Somerset will be, something of a potentially significant straw in the wind. And there, of course, it's much more evenly matched. That will tell you more, because people know either side could win, which I suspect, obviously, looking at those figures, ain't the perception in Tunbridge Wells.
I think there is a point about controlling local councils. I mean, one of the things that the Conservatives have managed to do in the last few years is take control in areas where there are Labour MPs. And you can go to some parts of the country now where almost every councillor is a Conservative, but the MP is still Labour. So, in fact, the first result tonight was Tamworth, and we're talking about, the Conservatives have gained a seat and we controlled Tamworth Council. Tamworth still has a Labour MP. So I remember. I remember when I was here in the 1990s. In fact, I was the researcher passing the notes in and so on. And we saw Conservative seats with Conservative MPs lose their councils to the Labour Party or the Liberal Democrats, and then, of course, at the subsequent general election, the seats themselves fall. And it's not just because of they indicate something about a national vote. It's also locally, you then have, if you're the Labour MP, no support on the ground. The council is Conservative, it's working with...
But it's not entirely true, because you have some places where traditionally you have one party in control of the council and the other person is an MP elected regularly, don't you? There are a lot of places like that.
Well, yeah, although at general elections, they tend to sort of reset.
OK. We'll come back here to this very interesting bit, but we'll go to Jeremy Vine first. Jeremy.
Well, David, George Osborne will recognise this place. It's the frozen area where the Conservatives have been for so many years, out of government. And here on the wall, as the chill wind blows through the studio, I can see the pictures of the ascent of man, that story of human evolution from the crouching ape right through to Homo erectus, standing tall and proud. And we're going to ask whether the Conservative ascent could be completed tonight. But let's go back, first of all, to, well, almost the year that Mr. Osborne mentioned, 1996. There we are. John Major, let's go back a year before that, 95, 26%. And there he is, really stooping, knuckle-dragging, poor performance in those local elections. So a long way to go for the Conservative Party. Watch what happened next. Who came next? 1998, it was William Hague, and doing better in those local elections with 33%, but still serious orthopedic problems there. The guy's in need of a back massage of some kind. Who came next in 2002? Ian Duncan Smith, 35%. You can see the progression, you can see the party gradually straightening up and walking tall, but of course still nowhere near winning a general election. Michael Howard thought he might. 2004, 38% in the local elections there, and almost straight, but not quite, just still stooping, still a little bit uncomfortable in his posture. So then we move to David Cameron, 40% 2 years running. And this now is the test, isn't it, for Mr. Cameron? Can he remain tall, upright, and in a position where he might think about winning a general election? Can he stay as Tory electus any lower than 40? And it will look as if his whole party is moving backwards. Back to you.
Well, let's now just do what we'll do once or twice in the evening and look at the results in more detail from the experts in the area where you're watching. And off they go. Now, we've got news from Cheltenham, you have, yes? You think the Liberal Democrats are doing well in Cheltenham?
Yeah, the one kind... What you said at the top of the programme about Cheltenham was this was an example, obviously, of a much more finely balanced contest, head-to-head, Conservatives and ourselves. And we're making gains at the Conservatives' expense there. That is significant. And, of course, that, going back to what George was fairly saying a moment ago, Cheltenham, of course, an example where we also hold the parliamentary seat. So if there's a degree of read across there, that's encouraging. And I gather
Hull has been taken.
And I gather Hull, it's just come up now.
Yes,
yeah,
that's right.
So we've regained Hull. So you know, early omens, I think, pretty good. Pretty good.
Okay.
Yes, although we've got news that we've taken West Lindsey Council from the Liberal Democrats, also Harlow, we've taken control of that. It's absolutely a crucial seat for us in the general election, currently held by Labour. So there's good... and 2 seats in Wigan, which is good news as well.
Right.
The road to
Hull,
Wigan
let's
Pier.
just have a look at Hull, and this is how Liberal Democrats took it back.
Yeah,
up
so it
5.
was 5.
And Labour overall down 1. Others fell by 4.
So the nostalgic Prescott factor didn't work its magic. Amazing.
It is an interesting sign, those results that we're getting in the South, because the assumption, I think, of many Liberal Democrats in Charles's party was that there would be a retreat from the South, that they would start to lose in the South to the Tories. The Tories would get many of those seats back that Margaret Thatcher used to hold, that John Major did. Now, we've just heard 2, Cheltenham, Worcester, in which the Tories are not making the sort of advances they would want to make there. Now, they may make advances all sorts of other places, but the way these results will be analysed, not tonight, but in a day or two by the party analysts, is seat by seat, saying, are we doing enough to gain that particular constituency?
But it's interesting because we've had the Liberal, the raw figure or the analysis giving Liberal Democrats looking as if they were doing worse than 2004, and yet the results coming through better so far, what we've had.
Yes, and remember that odd things can happen. It can take a lot of votes, for example, to win maybe 1 ward in a big city.
Yeah.
A very few votes lost, and you might lose 2 or 3 wards in a shire district. So the total number of votes may not be the most important guide. It's an important guide, but not the most important necessarily.
Right. Well, I tried to break this programme up and let you, wherever you are in the country, hear from your own specialist political reporters a moment ago, but it didn't actually work. So I'm going to try again. So goodbye, and you'll join us again in a couple of minutes. Tony?
I was just going to say, I know that Tessa Child doesn't think she needs to.
It's taken on a kind of national status, certainly a national significance, a race now of personalities, not just of parties. But what about the wider effects they're having on the confidence of the parties overall? Let's talk to Michael Portillo, Polly Toynbee and Tony Travers about that now. Michael, Boris has become sort of totemic for the Tories, hasn't he? If he doesn't win, it does suggest that the Tories haven't really picked up.
The Tories want to do very well in London. They need to win. But it's very, very curious because, of course, they're backing a candidate who is in many ways an embarrassment to them. I mean, if Boris wins tonight, then the Tories are going to be holding their breath for the next 2 years.
Do you still think that? I mean, that
yes,
was always
absolutely.
the joke, wasn't it? The only people who feared him more than Labour MPs was Tory MPs.
No,
Do you think that still stands?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the Tories have made a very good fist during the election of pretending that everything's all right with Boris. But this is the man that David Cameron sacked from the shadow cabinet. The man has made any number of gaffes. I mean, this was by no means their first choice of candidate. So, they will still be wondering what's going to happen if Boris wins tonight. Nonetheless, they absolutely need to win. It's a curious election. I mean, the Conservatives desperate to win with a candidate who embarrasses them, Labour desperate to win with a candidate who horrifies them.
Yeah, Polly, that's the point, isn't it, Polly Toynbee, that in essence we've seen the photo ops with Gordon Brown and Ken over the last few days, but we know there's a deep unease between those two men.
Oh, astonishing. I mean, terrible blood battles, particularly over the Tube and the PPP. I mean, they really, really hated each other. Brown refused to meet Ken at all over that time. Now they need each other. They're bound together. And Ken has been glad to have Brown around campaigning with him. Whether it's a good idea or not, I'm not sure. And on the other hand, he's very afraid that maybe he'll go down because Labour goes down rather than his own popularity.
So that's the point. If Ken doesn't get it, is that the beginning of the end of Brown? Is that the start of the sinking ship?
It's a long time to an election. If you think 4 years ago, Labour only got 26%, came third, and then a year later won an election. So there's not necessarily a connection.
Tony Travers, which way round do you think it's worked? Has London influenced the wider national politics, or has the party's position influenced what we're seeing in the mayoral race?
I think that there's no getting away from the fact that the national position of Labour, its terrible position in the polls, is a drag on Ken Livingstone. Ken Livingstone is almost the ultimate national or non-national but visible political brand in local or regional politics, and he can hold out for a long way against an unpopular party, and if he did that, then he would become an influence on national politics, because he'd have given Gordon Brown something that Gordon Brown can't get anywhere else, which is winning in elections.
There are people now starting to talk about this sort of divine right of Ken, if you like, this idea that because he's the incumbent and because there's no limit on how many times he can stand, it looks like he's not going, it's making people nervous. Do you think that might be creating a shift away?
It's a powerful argument, and there's no question that the British, for good reasons, don't like powerful political leaders who hang around too long. On the other hand, as we've just heard from Michael, the Conservatives have gone on with a challenging candidate in their own terms, and as Ken is already worth a few points, you add the two together, and it could actually give the Labour Party in London a better chance than they ever hoped for, given the position they're in, and that's why it's been such a difficult race to work out precisely what the result will be.
Okay, thanks all. Of course, we haven't got on to second preference, which could have a big influence on this one, but we will wait 24 hours, well, just under, to bring you that result.
So we've had results from Hull and from West Lindsey. We go to Tim Arnott, I think, in Lincoln here about that. Tim. Where is Tim? Where is West Lindsey? We don't have Hull, we've lost it. Okay. Let's see these results. West Lindsey, this is a Conservative gain from the Liberal Democrats. Up 4 for the Tories, down 4 for the Liberal Democrats. And the Hull result, a Liberal Democrat gain, or you may call it not a gain because they held it before, but they just lost a little bit back. They've done well. They've gained 5 seats. They need to gain 1, isn't it right, Charles, to take it back? One would have done it with 5. Yes, 5 was very, very greedy. Yeah, and we've got Knowsley, Labour on there, and Labour down 3, the Liberal Democrats up 3, and that's up in Knowsley, Metropolitan District. Sunderland, the story of Sunderland. Conservatives gain 5. This is real serious Labour heartland territory. Labour down 5 councillors, Conservatives up overall 5, so that will warm the hearts of the Tories. Tameside in Manchester, Labour hold on to this, again slight drop in Labour representation, slight increase for the Tories, one down for the Democrats. Great Yarmouth, Conservatives hold on. That council, they're up to at the expense of Labour. Great Yarmouth, North Coast.
Can I just say something about Sunderland result on the Tameside result in Greater Manchester, which is that there is always this argument put to me that the Conservatives can't win in the north. There's Sunderland in the north east of England, there's Tameside in Greater Manchester, where we've gained seats off Labour, and indeed, you now look across the north, we're doing extremely well. There are more seats in councils now with no Labour representation at all. There are Conservative councils with no Conservative representation. So I think that is a very good sign that we're winning places like Sunderland. And we actually took our spring conference to Gateshead and had a great conference in the north east of England just a couple of months ago.
Okay. Jeremy, are you there? Do you have something for us?
We are here, and we have something about that, and it's something you get your teeth into in the studio. This is a poll that we've done with ICM, and this is the question, the overarching question, which of the following statements apply to Labour, Conservatives, and the Democrats? I'll give you the statements one at a time. We're going to show you the results of last year, so you've got a bit of comparison here. Really reading this. The first one was, can be trusted to run Britain's economy? So which of the parties can be? We asked. The whole let's have a look at the results in 2007. First of all, 48% say Labour, 46 Conservatives, 33 the Liberal Dems. So Labour still ahead of the Conservatives last year. Moving on the year to this year, and look very sharp for Labour there, and the Conservatives who've also fallen maybe because of general economic work, they have pulled past Labour, and then quite a way down as well. That's the economy. Next question is this. Which party has a good team of leaders? So let's look at 2007 again. Here we go. And let's see what happened. 43% Labour, 2007, 36% Conservative, 32% Liberal Democrat. That was obviously under the Blair leadership. What happened? Forward to the Brown leadership. Drops very substantially there, and in fact you see now the Conservatives coming up past Labour in that question as well. So in the economy and the good team of leaders, Conservatives now ahead of Labour, although these numbers dropping as well. Dems again dropping worryingly, quite substantially there from their point of view. Okay, next question was this. Let's just take a look at it. And again, we asked Labour, Conservatives, Lib Dems, which of them is a divided party? Which is divided? In 2007, we got these answers. Quite a lot of people thought Labour were divided in 2007. 64%, nearly two-thirds. 36% said Conservatives, 25% said Lib Dems. Spin forwards, and well, Labour a bit less divided now. We'll have a chat about that in the studio. Conservatives a bit less divided now, and Lib Dems roughly where they were a year ago. So next question we asked was this, and it was on the NHS, again with reference to a question last year. We've been asking these questions since 2002, by the way, so it's not just these 2 years. 2007, what were the answers? 30% Labour, 36% Conservative, 38% Lib Dems. And the significance for us last year when we talked about this poll was that the Conservatives had pulled substantially past the Labour Party in that particular poll last year on that question. Watch what happens now. The answers this year. Labour are up a little bit on the NHS. The Conservatives are down. They've fallen now behind Labour and the Lib Dems. Also, for Charles Kennedy in the studio, some worrying figures on the Lib Dem side. Some quite sharp drops there. Okay, another question for you in our BBC ICM analysis poll. And this was one that has a bearing on the whole 10p tax mess, so we only asked it this year. Which is the party that has the right policies for those on a low income? Which parties have you can choose more than one party if you're being asked the question? Here we go with the answer. 29% Labour, 24% Conservative and 24% Lib Dem. So Labour, whatever has gone wrong on that whole issue, can at least say they have not been eclipsed on the whole poverty agenda by the opposition. Right, we ask now about individuals. Are the following politicians an asset or a liability? And we have three for you. Let's do the Prime Minister first of all. Gordon Brown, asset or liability? Let's have a look at the statistic for Gordon Brown. 42% said asset and 52% said liability, so substantially more people thinking Mr. Brown doing more harm than good for his party. Next one is, have a guess, Tony Blair. We thought we'd put him into this to get a comparison out. Asset or liability for his party? 47-47, so a better score than the man who followed him. And our following politician here, and the last question, by the way, for you at the moment, David Cameron. Asset or liability? Watch this one. This is interesting. 68% asset and 24% liability. So if you're Mr. Cameron looking at just your own personal leadership position, that is very good news. That's our poll. David?
We'll talk about that with the politicians in just a moment. But first, let's go to Nuneaton and join Joan Cummings, who has news from there. Joan.
Yes, David. What's happened here is that we've had history made. Labour were in charge for 34 years. Tonight, they've lost control. Nuneaton and Bedworth has turned blue. The Conservatives have got the gains that they wanted, and they have taken control of this traditional Labour stronghold. I have to also say that BNP, who canvassed 12 candidates, also gained 2 seats tonight. And the feeling here is that this is a tide turning. I spoke to the Conservative leader, who is now obviously also going to be the leader of the council, and he said that people were basically just tired of what was going on in London. They wanted a change, and they were also tired of what was going on in their doorsteps. And he felt that they were representing a fresh change, and indeed that's what's happened. The Labour leader is now the leader of the opposition, and as I said, after 34 years, Nuneaton and Bedworth Council is under Conservative control.
Very much indeed. Well, what do you make of that?
Well, I mean, this is, very clearly, I mean, that Nuneaton is a council that has been Labour for a very long time. It took a change of 3 seats to lose overall control. To what extent this has been determined by a national trend as opposed to local factors, I think is difficult to determine.
Is
and I think
a badly run council by Labour? It's been Labour since the 70s, hasn't it?
It's been a Labour council for a very long time. Yes.
You were making the distinction earlier in this programme about feelings about the government and Gordon Brown as opposed to what happened locally, and were warning that it was what happened locally was just as important. Are you saying in Nuneaton this was a Labour Party that let you down by running the place badly and so lost it, or is it because of number 10?
David, I don't know how people who live in Nuneaton experiences the services of the local council. But, I think whether you have the sort of, that sort of incumbency for 34 years can, give rise to a sense that the council is complacent and so forth. I mean, it's, obviously it's a pity that we've lost control, but no doubt local factors have played a part in this.
Very just a question, actually. It was 3 or 4 seats that needed to shift. Do we know in Nuneaton, just out of interest, how many seats did shift?
No, we don't yet. We haven't done the result. We've heard the BNP.
The loss of 3 seats would have lost
the actual figures. Yes.
No, but we must be clear right now. This is going to be a very bad night for Labour indeed, and the only question is how bad. It's perfectly possible that at the end of the night, when we eventually see the estimated national share of the vote, we will see Labour going down below what they were in 2004, and that was pretty awful. We should be quite clear about it. The Liberal Democrats are picking up from Labour, even while losing to the Conservatives, and of course we see Labour voters switching to the Tories. It's going to be awful. I don't think we can get away from it.
Worse than Tony Blair straight after the Iraq War, when it was clear that there was no weapons of mass destruction.
Well, it looks like that.
We're tired of him. Now, we see when we look at these individual results how some don't look so good for the Tories, others do look good. So we started off with Cheltenham and Worcester, which will be disappointing to them if they want to win those seats. Obviously, Harlow in Essex and now Nuneaton in Warwickshire. The sort of seats they need to pick up to form a government. Much better news for them and a building block for them to get those seats.
All right, well, we'll go down now to City Hall.
Through the magic of email that comes across from a Conservative source, through here, not from the man in the studio, they're predicting now 200 councillors gained.
And you're willing to go along with that? That was what Eric Pickles
Well, I don't
said.
have an email, I have a sheet of paper which says... It only says we are predicting 200 gains, but, we'll wait and see. I mean, I think we can start to say it is turning out to be a very good night for the Conservatives. We are winning across the country, winning in all parts of the country. It looks like our vote share going to be up. But more importantly, we're actually gaining controls of lots of councils, and people are going to have a local Conservative council. So, off a very difficult base for us in 2004, where everyone, including the BBC, was saying it's going to be very difficult to make gains tonight for the Conservatives, it looks like it's going to be a very good night.
Yes, I don't think we just said it was going to be... Yes, had you done well in 2004, and it would be different.
Well, that sounds all right to me. We're going to do even better.
No, just a word of warning. We've only had 19 out of 140 council results in that we're going to get. So there's a long way to go. But let's join Emily Maitlis.
Yes, I'm joined by John Culshall, a divided man, a man who's no stranger to politics. He started life, many of you remember, as a spitting image, now best known for his dead ringers. John, it's funny, isn't it, sitting here in what they call the London living room of City Hall. It's been sort of Ken's spiritual home for the last 8 years. What do you think Boris would do if he got it?
I think he'd just sort of probably run into here and celebrate on a unicycle and be jolly excited and think, here we are. But it's interesting watching how the tone of Boris changed through his campaign. There was much more of that famous sort of Boris Johnson jollity and informality and buffoonery at the beginning, and then, there seemed to be a tipping point where he thought, right, actually, can we change now and be a little bit more serious? Sort of Boris means business, that sort of tone. And there was a sort of meandering as the campaign went on. But yes, I think he'd run in here and celebrate.
One of the commentators was just saying that the question is not if it's going to be bad for Labour tonight, but how bad it's going to be. Now, obviously, that's just one view, one voice. But what kind of a night do you imagine Gordon Brown's having?
Well, I suppose with this being the first test, in a sense, he'll be very nervous. You saw a sense of that when he was looking around some of the polling stations earlier. That slightly nervous smile was there. He'll probably be getting together a few of those catchphrases just to bat trouble away.
What are your favourite Brown catchphrases?
I think one of the catchphrases that he does use is, I'm just getting on with the job. That's the important thing, the deep responsibility of government.
And do you think he feels that sort of shadow of Tony Blair over his shoulder, sort of looking
probably
on?
at this stage. And I think, Blair used rather different catchphrases to bat away trouble. He would always say, and he'd sort of go very earnest and sort of change his body language and sort of speak from the heart like that. Whereas Gordon was, what's important to us, he was much more introspective.